Yeah, it's just connecting to the cloud now. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our session, Leadership Rising. Re-entry is something that we have not done before. And there are many aspects to this process, which is why last Friday I was incredibly exhausted after having run 3 weeks of Leadership Summit. And I thought it was a pleasure to do so. And it was nice to have a break. And then an hour later, I started thinking about all the conversations I've been having with my clients over the past 4 weeks, the fear, the anxiety, the stress. What struck me most was the incredible care right now that people have for each other. How the pressure on leaders. Leadership is a tough gig at the best of time. It's a really tough gig right now with the expectations that we place on ourselves and on our leaders. I thought it would be really helpful, and I had to do something. I just thought I need to do something. How can I help? I don't have the expertise to answer all the questions, and right now we need a diverse range of knowledge and expertise, and we need to educate ourselves in a way that we haven't had to before. So I thought, who can I call? And it wasn't Ghostbusters. That's my only joke for the day. It is Friday. I called on some experts, and I called Wowdy Taché. Thank you so much, Wowdy. I'll introduce all of our panelists in a moment. Dave Camrodi, thank you so much for being one of our panelists, and Dr. Dave Camrodi and Dr. Rachel Cameron. So for those of you I haven't met, my name is Pollyanna. Essentially, I'm an executive coach, and what I care deeply about is creating workplaces that people want to go to and can be their best in. And how I do that is helping to create a culture where leaders, create exceptional high performance consistently in teams, and also create workplaces where we focus on wellbeing equity. And what that means for me is a workplace where both men and women can thrive and have inclusive workplaces and gender equity. But today I wanted to really think about what you may need, hence bringing the speakers together. So without further ado, as they say, I want to introduce our 3 panelists. Rachel Cameron, Dr. Rachel Cameron holds a Bachelor of Science and first-class honours in pathology, or the study of what causes disease, and a PhD in medicine from the Department of Infectious Diseases, specialising in human viruses from the University of Sydney, Stanford in the USA. Rachel spent 20 years working in various roles in the healthcare sector, including more than 5 years specialising in respiratory virology, where she led a team of scientists who were working to develop treatments for viruses like coronavirus, influenza, and the common cold. Rachel has spent many years, and having known Rachel over many years, she's incredibly dedicated to educating other healthcare professionals, such as professors and doctors, regarding antiviral medicines, and she's worked at some of the largest drug and vaccine manufacturers. Rachel has lectured at universities of Sydney, Melbourne and Monash, and has taught in the Southern School of Natural Therapies. So in addition to virology, Rachel has experience in other parts of healthcare, including drug design, disability services, hospital and healthcare management, including HR, teaching, training, leadership, and executive coaching. She has 3 successful consulting businesses, including her most recent, which specialises in navigating the healthcare system for those who are newly diagnosed with cancer. Her company that supports cancer advocacy is Health Equals Freedom, Making Sense of Cancer. You can purchase Rachel's recent book, You Have Cancer, Now What Is Available, on Amazon. Dr. Rachel is passionate about sharing her expertise, and it's an absolute pleasure to have her here today. Rachel, welcome. I'd like to also introduce Dave Camrodi. Dr. Dave, as I'm going to call you, is a child and adolescent psychiatrist and the director of Call to Mind, a tele-psychiatry service that offers psychiatry appointments to patients across Australia. He works with young people and their families who are experiencing difficulties and stress related to mental health concerns, and takes a systems and systemic approach to recovery. So having Dave here today, I think from that psychological transition safety aspect is so incredibly important. How we support our people and how we support ourselves as we make that transition back is going to be a key cornerstone of a successful transition. So some of Dr. David's areas of specialty is re-entry for students and their parents, experiencing, people who, as we've been experiencing COVID and working from home for such a long time, that re-entry piece psychologically is an incredible cornerstone of how we do this. And our third, but certainly by no least, speaker is Dr. I've just made you a doctor, Wowdy. Wowdy Taché, HR Director. Wowdy has extensive experience, an adaptable HR executive, and his experience spans across both the private and public sectors in HR, change and transformational programs in various leadership capacities. Wowdy is currently the HR Director APAC for RL Datix, if I pronounced that right, Wowdy?
Yep.
Working on a global framework for the return to the office, and is really keen to share insights on organisational considerations for workplace normalcy. Wowdy, I really look forward to hearing about that workplace normalcy, because I think we are in a new normal that hasn't been experienced before. So that's going to be really valuable today. So what I wanted to do is, to start this process is, Rachel, if we could start with yourself, and probably a key message that you feel is really important for us to understand right now from the virology lens. As Rachel and all of our panelists are speaking today, please start to think about the questions that you have so that we make this time you're spending with us incredibly valuable for you. So please get what you need today. And any questions that we haven't been able to answer, we will make sure that we get to those as best as we can after the session. So Dr. Rachel, please, what are some of the highlights that you feel are really important, the key messages that you want to share with our audience today?
So what I want to do is, in summary, give a little bit of background of my own virology experience, and then give you tips and things that you can apply as you transition back to work to make you feel more comfortable and make you feel more comfortable coming home from work. So would you like me to give a bit of background?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So in the theme of that re-entry, that sounds like a perfect place to start.
Great. So in the mid-90s, I actually first started learning that pandemics pose very large risks to humans. We as a species have always been at risk, and the chance of virus infection is something that we must always consider and protect ourselves and plan for. Taiwan, for example, has done really well with COVID because they had experience before with SARS. Now, actually, my first job following graduation from my PhD was to assess if there was a risk of the family of blood products that are used in Australia, if we're bitten by snakes, spider, box jellyfish or ticks, transmitting virus to humans. Now, this was in the late 90s at Australia's largest drug and vaccine manufacturer, CSL Limited. Now, these special products are known as antivenoms and are all made in humans. The Australian government had asked CSL to check that these products were safe for Australians if injected, and to make sure they would not pass on virus. So they employed me to check this. I investigated if viruses could pass from animals to humans and vice versa. Now, I can tell you that viruses do often jump between species and can do so in either direction, actually. And I'm proud to say the good news was that these blood products are not able to pass viruses to us if we're bitten by toxic animals such as a snake, thanks to my work. Now, because pandemics are always a risk to us, some years back, the world started stockpiling antiviral treatments for flu. Because these antivirals work on all strains of flu and can be taken once someone is infected. Whereas most vaccines are only useful for prevention and will not work if you're already infected with the virus. Now, back in January, February this year, I was concerned regarding the reports of SARS and MERS-like coronavirus in China, and some reports were starting to surface regarding infections in Italy. This is when I started coaching my family. who are elderly and severely immune compromised, and friends, which triggered me to develop some tools, including my infographic, to help people understand how to protect themselves from COVID when returning from home to the community, and vice versa. One of my businesses coaches people who are newly diagnosed with cancer and are very vulnerable to COVID. Through a visual tool, I thought this would speed up sharing of this information for my clients, family and friends, which, you know, I shared with Pollyanna, of course. I will make this available for all our viewers today as well. So please understand, to keep safe, we must know that COVID is very infectious. It is easy to transmit. It is invisible. And some people can transmit the virus with no symptoms. And that's actually estimated to be about 40% of people. So if you or anyone you know has any symptoms, you must go for a COVID test and stay at home until your result comes back. So this is important in the workplace context. There are cases of community transmission at the moment, and they are likely to increase as we start to move around more and more. Clusters or outbreaks and second, third or fourth waves of infection are possible until such time as we have a vaccine, which is realistically likely to be 12 months or more away. So this is something we have to accept.
So Rachel, let me just jump in for one moment, because that's a lot of information for us to digest, and it's very important information. And so what are the steps that we can take when we're traveling to work, given all of the complexities that are surrounding COVID, rate of infection, spread? So what can we practically do as we re-enter our physical spaces?
Okay, so when we go back to work, when we leave our homes, it's important to only take things we really need to work. So lighten your handbag or your briefcase to essential items. Ideally, your cards should be in a Ziploc bag, which are easily sanitized, and you wouldn't carry a wallet. You would sanitize your keys. If you're taking your lunch, for example, to work, you would make sure you keep it in a designated container with your name on it. It would be washed in hot water and detergent if you bring it home. You wouldn't leave this in a communal kitchen at work, for example. You would put your bag not on your desk at work. You'd put it on the ground or in a locker. You'd leave anything you're eating in your drawers or in your locker or under your desk. Ideally, you wouldn't take things like keep cups or other reusable drink cups or water bottles between home and work. So that's a lot of information, but they're actually practical things. And one of the reasons that I did the infographic, I've summarized some of these top line topics just to help people think about these things, which are actually really new for us all, probably other than microbiologists, virologists, but also there's topics of public transport and so on, which I can go on further. Did you want me to add?
And Rachel, one of the things I love about what you're doing with your work is simplifying it to make it digestible for those of us, which is everybody except for you on this call probably, who don't have that deep, extensive expertise in viruses and virology. So we'll make sure everyone knows where to access those. And I actually I would recommend print them out, and you can put them in your workplaces. And I've actually got them on the fridge at home because. So one of the things, we want to create a community where we can all be responsible and take care without adding to anxiety. And we'll talk to Dave in a moment about that. So Rachel, what are the highest areas of risk? Because I think mitigating risk is important here. What are the highest areas?
Yeah, okay, so the areas that are probably the most dangerous to highlight for you are where you're indoors, and also where you're likely to be in close contact with others. So the sorts of places are workplaces, gyms, public transport, public toilets, restaurants, cafes, shopping centres and traders such as Bunnings and Spotlight. So I don't know if any of you have been in there lately, but there's some interesting behaviour in there.
Okay, Rachel, thank you. I'm going to give you a pause for a moment. You know, I'm thinking if I'm in a large organisation, I'd be making a fast track to your door to come and do some consulting, because having this level of information is priceless insofar as keeping our health and safety. So thank you, Rachel. I'll give you pause. Dr. Dave, would you like to just jump in for a moment?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Pollyanna. It's really nice to meet everyone. I know Rachel previously from some work that we've done together before, so it's nice to see everyone here this morning. You gave a bit of an intro about my background. So I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I see mostly young people up to about the age of 30 with a range of mental health difficulties. I also run a telehealth practice. So a group of about 30 psychiatrists who provide telehealth appointments. So that was something that was pre-existing the COVID situation, but now has become even more pertinent recently with the sort of explosion in telehealth since COVID. My background is similar to Rachel in medicine, and then I trained in psychiatry and with a focus on young people. I suppose part of my some relevance in terms of my training has been exposure to a lot of people who are experiencing anxiety and difficulties with stressful situations. A big part of my work that I see young people for is a return to school. So often when teenagers or children who have been out of school for any number of reasons, including physical health problems or mental health problems, the return to school can be a very anxiety-provoking time. And I work with families around and schools around how to sort of support people as they make a successful return to school. So I think there's probably some applicability from that would applies to this situation. I thought I might start, Pollyanna, just with a bit of a summary of some of the recent things I've seen in terms of the people that I'm seeing and any trends I've noticed. Would that be okay with you?
That would be perfect, because we're not just, not everyone has children that they're supporting, and a lot of people do. So again, it's multifaceted. There's supporting yourself, supporting your people, supporting your children, and your own to work. So there'll be themes across that. Which I thought was really relevant, and why I was very excited to have you here. So yes, please.
I suppose there's been a range of responses, I think, that I've seen, and I think that that sort of speaks to the diversity of how people experience stress and situations like this. I've noticed that some people have been particularly stressed around the overall atmosphere of anxiety in our society at the moment, but there's also the sort of more practical aspects, I think, that people find quite stressful too, which is economic uncertainty and hardship, and particularly to do with uncertainty around the stability of their employment, what that's going to look like, and a lot of people have either been furloughed or laid off entirely. I think I'm also seeing that there's been a bit of a breakdown in some of the social supports around, is that a lot of people have been isolated from their usual supports, whether that's family, their workplace, sporting teams, the sort of usual social contact that people use has been sort of taken away in some aspects. And I think that's going to be quite different and going to look different for a long time. I think there's just also been a general lack of loss of structure, which affects some people. So a lot of people have been working from home or have altered work schedules. And I think that takes some of the usual structures that people rely on as part of as how they manage. I suppose in terms of my approach to anxiety, which is prominent at the moment, is a sort of an appreciation for how that diversity of anxiety can be experienced, and the sort of the challenges that poses to a workplace of having this range of how people will respond to anxiety.
Absolutely. There's a lot to think about there. Dave, thank you. I'm starting to collect some questions which will be coming the panel's way in a moment. Thank you so much. Wouty, if we could unmute you and welcome.
Yes, hi everyone. My name's Wouty Taché. I'm the HR director for RL Datix, and I've only been in the organisation for 3 months, so this was something that certainly came across very quickly, and you sort of get into that mode of, I guess, being inducted into an organisation, and then suddenly this gets thrown across your desk, and you're into the how you manage it in terms of the workforce, and how do we get people working from home and keeping people safe. So look, I think there's been a lot of obviously talk about this virus and all the things that go along with it in terms of the workplace. I'd probably best summarise it as it's a change, and what we are experiencing at the moment is a change in lifestyle, a change in social, the way we live socially, the way we work, the way we live. And so I guess it's probably one of those events. I guess it's, we've heard the word unprecedented come up many times. And so I wish I had $1 for every time someone mentioned that word. But the reality is it's new to us. And I think as a human race, we are adjusting and we are adapting as we go. There are no right or wrong answers, I think, and that's what happens in times of uncertainty. You're in that, I guess, holding phase. You're sort of not sure how things are going to go. But I think it's important to remember to think about the things that are factual, that are real, and what we can do about it as workplaces, first and foremost, as far as in our context, but then us as human beings, of course, because safety is really important, and that's central to everything that we do. Certainly at RL Datix, for sure, and that's part of our purpose is to keep patients safe as well, and keeping employees safe in times like this is critical, absolutely critical. And so that's all our decision making is around that. So I guess for me, I'm certainly interested in some of the questions that come through and share what we've done over the last month or so to plan for what does the return to the office look like. And I'm looking forward to hearing from a lot of people around some questions they might have, but also share some more insights as we go along.
Wouty, thank you. There are questions coming in thick and fast, so Cess and I are in the background collating those as we speak. There's I'll give you a moment to pause. I think one of the questions that is coming through as a theme, Wouty, that will be a good one for you to have a think about is what will the workplace look like when we return to the office? And Wouty, you've said something really important here. Anyone who's familiar with the Bridges transition model is, I think about that, Wouty, as you're talking. There's those William Bridges 3 phases of transition. If you're not across it, it's a great one to Google and just have a look at. The first phase is, first of all, you're not aware, it's denial, obviously. But once you become aware of it, it's that letting go. What do we need to let go of as we're moving forward into that change? Second phase is the neutral zone, and I think we're sort of in the neutral zone right now. The neutral zone's a bit wobbly. We don't know. It's like walking on marshmallows rather than a solid surface. And we have to transition and do hard stuff in the neutral zone to be able to get to the new place. It's very easy to run back to the comfort zone, but we can't run back to comfort zone behaviours because that's positively dangerous for ourselves and others. So, Wouty, really important points there. Thank you. Another question that's come through for you also is, what are the aspects organisations and HR should consider in preparing for the office? So if you're happy to jump in and answer one of those. Yep. Now, let me know. Yeah.
Yes, for sure. So the considerations, I guess, from a HR perspective, there are many and varied. But I think the most important thing is if you haven't started to plan, you probably should use this opportunity to start that process. if you haven't already. But I think the first thing that should be considered is establishing a business continuity planning committee. If you already haven't, I think that's really important from a governance perspective. And that could be representations from across the business, health and safety, HR, business representatives, those types of stakeholders. Understanding what are your risks. So what does a risk assessment look like for your workplace? So naturally, when we come back into the office, it's going to look different. We know there's social distancing that the government has given us guidance on. What does that mean for your workplace, and how does that then affect your capacities, your workforce capacities? Are you going to fit everyone back in? Are you going to take a phased approach in transitioning back to the office, or will you rotate people in and out of the office and have a partial workforce from home or a partial workforce working from the office? I think one of the most important things in this process is to engage your people. Understand what are they thinking about? What would they like to see? How can we best support them as far as what their workplace what they want to see in the workplace, and how would they feel about commuting into the office? It's really important. I think Rachel touched on this. Is the commuting to the office is that aspect of engaging with, you're with people and you're standing close to people on public transport. What are some of the strategies to get into work? Do we delay our times to come into work? So do we have to adjust our hours from a workforce perspective? There's those sorts of considerations, so that rather than people going in during peak times, you'd sort of look at perhaps them coming in a little bit later, so that there's less people on transport. Carpooling, riding people's bikes. What sort of reimbursement aspects does the company provide in those sorts of things?
Yeah, well, that's awesome. And I wanted to jump in and just say that's a really important piece, and meeting people where they are at rather than assuming where they're at. I think I wanted to go back to that, Weldy, because I think the pandemic, from an observation, is it can unite people to bring more care and compassion into the world. We're seeing that. It also can be quite polarizing as well, where people have very different views. There's also, and that combined with the misinformation that is out there, which is why it was so important to have Rachel's expertise in here. I was sharing with Rachel that I went for a walk with I've been using the no commuting time to walk and talk with someone I haven't, socially distanced, but haven't seen for a while. Mm-hmm. And one of my walk and talk buddies went, "Isn't it awesome that one of the strains of COVID has sort of run out now because we've been so good at social distancing?" So I said, "Rach, tell us today about some of that misinformation that could be potentially dangerous." I'll be coming to you in a moment, Rachel, with regards to that. But meeting people where they're at and knowing that they'll be at different places, then that communication piece, I think, Weldy, is really important, because if I'm like desperate to get out of the house, get my kids back at school, because homeschool, for the parents out there who have been homeschooling primary school children, I have renewed respect for you. And I know you've been homeschooling some grandchildren as well. Absolutely, I am in awe of the fact that you're up, you're dressed, and you're doing all of these incredible things, as well as your work, following through with your working responsibilities. So not everybody is going to be where you're at. Some good open questions in your back pocket. Just a simple one of how you're doing with this. We're really important. Dave, something that you said that I think is really very relevant, and that is your expertise and specialty is helping people re-enter after not entering, supporting both families and children. But we're all human beings, and regardless of our age, there are some threads and commonalities there. So what approaches do you take when helping a student to re-enter a school environment that we could actually apply to help across helping our children re-enter school, helping ourselves? So what are the things that you could share that would help in those two scenarios?
Yeah, I think it probably has some relevance in terms of that a lot of people have their children will be returning to school at the moment and face a similar challenge to adults. So we're sort of, I think a lot of people will be facing that on the at home and also at their workplace too. My sense is that Firstly, there's you do need to understand, sort of picking up on that theme of meeting people where they're at. The fact that different people have different experiences of stress and different and manifest that in different ways. So a lot of the young people that I see, it may not be overtly obvious that they're anxious about a return to school, but they may express in other ways. And I think that's the same workplace as well, is that there's going to be a range of how people express that concern or that anxiety, whether that's a sort of a disavowal of any anxiety at all and saying that things are going to be fine and almost overconfident, or people might focus on the aspects that they can control, like they might sort of become sort of more obsessive about certain topics or things like that as well. Or it might be that people are obviously very, struggling with overt anxiety. I think that it does require, and that's when I work with families where someone is trying to return to school, you have to understand the exact situation. So what are the factors at school that are anxiety provoking? What are some of the other factors that in the broader social life that are that people are struggling with, and also some of the individual factors. So I think that sort of picks up on what you were talking before about uncertainty. I think that that's so closely linked to anxiety because it's a fear of what can't be controlled and a fear of the future. And I think that so as much as we can sort of maintain some certainty, and I think that's where things like Rachel's suggestions around what their workplace is going to look like, some of those aspects, and a bit of a clear time schedule often provides some scaffolding to provide some certainty amidst broader uncertainty. I think it's also important for people to have develop those coping skills at the same time, so that people can manage that uncertainty and that anxiety. The part of the difficulty, and this is something that comes up a lot with the teenagers that I see, or people trying to return to university or other forms of work, is that unfortunately it does involve some necessary anxiety, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. There is the process of becoming more comfortable with the situation. You do need to have the experience of successfully managing anxiety in a different situation. So I think that it's not that there will be no anxiety for people, and I don't think that's a realistic goal. It's around how do you respond to that, and how do you manage that, and hopefully use that as a bit of an opportunity for people to grow themselves, and also to have that experience of managing this situation.
Dave, thank you. And there are a lot of, and I think that anxiety piece, it's really interesting. I skydived for 15 years. And I remember I always believed that what kept me alive is I never lost the fear of what could happen. Not to a point of debilitating, but the moment we became cavalier, that's when you hurt yourself.
Was the parachute also useful as well?
Sorry?
Was the parachute also useful?
The parachute was really useful, as was the reserve on a few occasions. So always good. Now, Rachel, some questions are coming in. There's lots of questions coming in for all of you, and I think you can all scroll through the chat box as well, Rachel, Rowdy, and Dave, if you get a sec. But one of the concerns that's coming up on the thread is how do I two things, one for Rachel, one for Rowdy. So for Rachel, what do I do if there's somebody that's, that I'm worried that someone's not being careful in the office, or if there's someone that has been tested positive in our office, what do we do?
Okay, so there's, part of the big issue here is around education. So if somebody's not adopting the behaviour that's going to keep them safe and colleagues, then they need to be coached around what is appropriate behaviour and why. And this is where it becomes tricky, because this virus is invisible. And, to be fair, the actual communication and information that's been shared about the pandemic hasn't been perfect. And, some experts that have been used have been overused by the media and confused people. We're expecting people, the public, to take on information in a couple of weeks that they've never heard before and change behaviour. And we know adult behaviour change is extremely difficult and it takes time. So education and coaching around what is appropriate behaviour is needed by line managers, leaders and HR obviously. So that's something that they would need to consider. If someone tests positive, they need to leave the workplace and go home and be in isolation for 2 weeks if they're positive. And they will have contact tracing, and any of the contacts in the office will also potentially need to be sent home as well. So if someone in your office does test positive, then it's likely that the people in the office will need to go into quarantine, so they'll have to leave work.
Thank you, Rachel. And Wowdy, if I can flick across to you. So they're also, I'm guessing everyone now has a COVID evacuation policy that's not a reproduction of your fire drill, because so if that's not in place, then Wowdy, you could probably speak to that. And a question that's coming up for you as well, Wowdy, is how do you deal with open floor concepts and take the anxiety of my employees being in an open plan office whilst keeping social distancing rules?
Yeah, look, that's a complex issue because again, it's one of those ones where you want to encourage collaboration and enable people to interact, but doing it in such a way that is safe to do so. So, look, one of the things that we're considering is thinking about putting markings on the floors particularly around desks and particular areas, and establishing some protocols around obviously those social distancing facets that we're living at the moment. And when we go to a supermarket, we have to do that, or if we're lining up at a checkout at a supermarket, be it Bunnings, Coles, Woolies, Aldi, wherever it may be. So those facets are the things that organisations and workplaces need to consider, and then understand and educate our people around how those things are now going to change our cultures. This is the other aspect around coming back into the workplace. It's not going to be the way it was previously. Culturally, there will be some practices that will change. And some of those practices will be things like hygiene stations within the office, markings of tape on the floor potentially to give people visuals to sort of remind people of ensuring that there's enough distance between people, 4 square metre space between desks so that people aren't getting too close to each other. It shouldn't stop us from doing business. The most important thing here is we're probably socially doing this stuff at home in our own homes. So the workplace is just an extension, I guess, of that, and other places, public places that we attend. So we'll treat it in a similar vein, and I think that's the core principle of how to deal with it in an open plan environment, because you still want people to interact, but do it in a safe and responsible manner, and understand that people, staff also have responsibilities to ensure that they're doing the right thing. So as much as an employer can provide protocols and guidance, it's also about employees' responsibilities, and being very clear on what that looks like and communicating that is critical.
Can I just add one thing in terms of offices? The communal kitchen is going to be problematic. So that's something that HR and management will really have to coach people on, because I know communal kitchens often have issues with behaviour anyway.
Yep.
So that will be a tricky area because that's a risky area.
And Rachel, what about toilets? You've actually preempted the next question. You are awesome. So kitchens, I'm guessing other areas where everyone has to go, the bathroom.
Yeah, so the bathroom now, there is evidence that the virus may be transmitted in faeces. So we actually need to apply a new behaviour that I know and a lot of people are not familiar with, which is when you flush the toilet to have the seat lead down. So that's something that we should apply at home as well and get into the habit of doing that. So that's often very difficult for people, and some workplaces don't have toilet lids, so essentially that's a risk just of flushing the toilet. And then air dryers actually have higher risk of transmitting COVID than paper towels. So, and there's evidence of that in the literature, medical literature. So That's, you know, less environmentally friendly, but in the context of COVID at the moment, it's a higher risk to use air drying. So for some workplaces, they would have to make some alternative plans. And also you need to have hand sanitizer. Now, one of the things I think a lot of people don't realise, hand sanitizer is actually only very short acting. So you need to apply it often for it to work. To actually remove virus, you do that with hand washing. Now, I do have a video, the WHO hand washing video on my website if people aren't familiar with that. But hand washing is superior to sanitisation, but if you can't hand wash, then you use hand sanitizer. So workplaces need to have hand sanitizer in the bathroom as well as hand washing, because some people don't wash their hands. So you've got to be able to have the two options. And knobs, buttons and things like that can also be contaminated. So we, depending upon your handles and knobs and doors, there's things you can do like, you know, if you've got a sleeve, you can actually use your sleeve over a handle. You can kick the door, you can push your back into it. These are things that we get taught, you know, in science and medical training, but this is not something people are familiar with to do, which would need coaching and training around. So, you know, anything we touch could have been touched by somebody else who has COVID and has contaminated that surface. And that's why public transport's higher risk, because there's many things you have to touch, which many people have touched.
Rachel, thank you. And that comes to a question here from Nicole that says, the concern I have personally and professionally is not so much the environment once we get to our work or school destinations. You know, they've got great processes in place, but in commuting on public transport. So it's really interesting. It's saying, how are public transport providers going to manage and control social distancing? Well, I can't answer that because I'm not from transport and no one here is from transport. I think we have actually got some people from transport in the audience. However, the question is, what can we do? And I think, Rachel, you've been speaking to that, because leadership is not just about looking to our leaders to have all the answers. Leadership is about stepping in without title to say, how am I going to lead myself through this process? I'm noticing a tendency which is taking it towards setting up blame. You know, that's unreasonable. You know, we are all in this together and we need to support each other, which is why we've convened this session today. Dave, over to you, if I can just quickly on that. What are you noticing? What are some of the likely mental health impacts? Because we're sort of, there's a lot to go here. 1 minute we're going, be really kind to yourself, then we're going in equal measures, be responsible for yourself and others, while you're navigating all this other stuff and you've been working really long hours, plus trying to homeschool kids if you've got children. So what are the likely mental health impacts, and how can people, you know, our leaders in our organisation notice them? Yeah.
I think it's a time where mental health is under enormous strain. I think the uncertainty, the economic hardship, it's going to have massive impacts, and it's going to be long lasting, and probably will be the next sort of phase of the recovery from COVID, I think. In terms of, you know, I think that there's sort of certain things to be aware of in that context, and then there's certain things that leaders in the workplace or managers can do. I think that probably having an awareness that this is going to be a stressful time, that people experience that differently, and that it is important to sort of check in and offer that space for support and to acknowledge that. I think that also you mentioned about sort of the model and the sort of example that leaders can set. I think modeling that's the approach of acknowledging some of that uncertainty and some of that stress, and then yet still being able to carry on and being able to work effectively, I think is going to be really important. So I think that it's not just I think leaders should also still acknowledge some of those challenges, some of those difficulties that they might experience with working from home or with general uncertainty, and not having all of those answers, but still being able to manage that. I think that cognitive flexibility around balancing uncertainty with also the potential opportunities is going to be really important. I think one of the main things for people, and this is another thing to model in organizations and in the family, is still maintaining self-care. Because I think a lot of things have fallen down in that regard in terms of social supports, routine and structure, and the usual things that we do. I think that it's really important at this time to have an emphasis on self-care, whether that's through the very obvious things in terms of diet, exercise, regular exercise, and also regular social contact support. That might look a bit different how it looked previously, but that's where that cognitive flexibility is important to sort of indicate that you can find other ways of meeting some of those needs, and it's going to be up to leaders to model how to do that, I think.
Absolutely. And, one of the things is, acknowledgement, acknowledging that we're doing really well in something that's very new for all of us, that's creating a lot of anxiety and fear. So what would it be like to acknowledge the people in your life, in your world, whether it be your children, to say, hey, you're doing a great job homeschooling. My 13-year-old goes, yeah, you told me that yesterday. However, still saying it. Yeah, letting our leaders know in our organizations that we can see that you've got a lot to carry on your shoulders right now. You're doing a great job. Some of that acknowledgement piece, I think, is going to be incredibly important for self members, for others. Tanya has asked a question here. There's two of your questions in one, Tanya. There was a question to Woudy around how do you manage the rotation? So if you could answer that one first, Woudy. Great.
Yes. Yeah, sure. It's a great question, because I think one of the things that organisations could consider is first of all, for those that want to come back to the office, that it's on a voluntary basis to start with. I think to force people to come back is going to be quite challenging, and I think we may find some resistance. Naturally, there are certain roles that have that may need to come back for genuine reasons, and that could be just based on the role that they're undertaking. So, as far as managing rosters, that's something that we, as HR leaders, need to work with our people leaders to establish a system, or whether it's a shift-based system or a roster, and looking at how we rotate people through. But initially, to start with, I think looking at volunteers, those that want to come back, and then there's potentially those that genuinely can't come back because of health reasons, vulnerability as far as the exposure to the virus. There's a whole lot of genuine reasons. So I think I'd be looking to sort of test that out as a starting point, and then seeing and then how we measure that as we go, and adapting, and whether we have the capacity to introduce even more people into the workforce as well. So, but just understand that initially it'll be based primarily on a voluntary basis, and then setting up a roster system where it's on an opt-in basis.
Fantastic. And Woudy, one more question to you before I flick across to you, Rachel, and that is Shauna McAvoy has a question. Do we need to stop hot desking right now?
I believe we need to do it in a different way. If we're going to hot desk, we would need to do advanced or deep cleaning between users. And in offices, where possible, if we can actually have people sitting at certain locations. So I think if we can do a bit of a combination of the two, if possible. Some workplaces may not be able to have designated work spaces, so there'd have to be extra procedure around deep cleaning between users, because our phone, keyboard and mouse get contaminated by touch.
And Rachel, when you think about, there are a lot of people on the call today from larger organisations, but there's also people on the call here today from smaller organisations. So larger organisations will have processes in place for specialists to come in and clean. It sort of takes on a new message. I remember, for smaller offices, the last one out, turn the lights off. Well, now it's the last one out, sanitise and disinfect the office. That's a big ask. Yes. So what are the processes that are absolutely mandatory? If you're going to open your office and keep your people safe, you have to do this. If I could hear from each of the panelists on that, if you there's never one thing, but there's a absolutely mandatory, these are things that need to be considered, regardless of your size or scale. Rachel, could you jump in first?
Well, from my perspective, it would be good cleaning and sanitisation practices and physical distancing practices. So how that plays out in each workplace would need to be adapted on a case-by-case basis, I think, and that's what will make it challenging.
Thank you. Dr. Dave?
I think for me, the main thing will be acknowledgement of anxiety, acknowledgement of uncertainty, and the fact that will necessarily remain at some level because of the unprecedented nature of what we're dealing with. And I think then checking in and offering some resources would be the most useful thing.
Thank you. Rowdy?
Yeah, look, I think certainly doing the right things as far as sanitisation, looking after yourself, both at obviously naturally a physical level, but at a mental health level, and I think just maintaining some form of social connection with people now that restrictions are easing a little bit. I'm not saying certainly go full on and go to these big parties or anything like that. Not that they are allowed, but I think having that social connection, because we are social creatures by nature, and we certainly don't want to see that aspect go away completely. So I think just being mindful of those things and yourself. I think if you're focused on yourself, then everything else around you will be looked after by others, and trust that others are looking out for your interests and everyone else's interests.
Absolutely. And I spoke to Dr. Sophie Adams prior to convening this, the gathering here today, and she was the head psychiatrist on Homeward Bound. So Homeward Bound is an initiative. We took 80 women across STEM from 26 countries to Antarctica, and I got the idea of the re-entry by listening to Sophie's talk. And one of the things that we focus so much on the re-entry of others that we forget to think about the re-entry of ourselves and our own personal responsibility to that, and the remarkable impact we can have by observing some of the key aspects that Rachel, Dave, and yourself, Rowdy, have mentioned. And I think we are quite extraordinary. We have done extraordinary things. We can do hard things. We're doing hard things right now. So that acknowledgement piece to ourselves while we're acknowledging others, I think, is a really important piece, because there is optimism. However, that crazy positivity, just think positive thoughts, maybe not the time right now. Read the room. People are going to be having different experiences, which is why I think this is so important. There's another, Tanya, the other part of your question was, as an asthmatic, I cough regularly, and during these times I'm scared to cough will get looked at if I do cough. What advice and what education could we give teams with people living with these chronic conditions? Rachel, I think there's two parts of this question. If you've got a chronic condition, maybe you're not in the first wave going back, I'm guessing, but I don't have the expertise. Over to you. And if you could answer that, that would be great.
Look, that is a tricky one, because I'm also asthmatic too and often will cough. And sneezing and coughing could be another chronic condition which colleagues need to be educated about. If possible, asthmatics ideally would stay at home, but that's not practical from a long-term perspective. So I think, each individual may not want to disclose their chronic health condition either. So that becomes a tricky area as well. So I think that people who do have chronic health conditions need to work with their line manager and HR departments around how to do that in a way that's going to keep them safe, and also increase the confidence of colleagues around their colleagues coughing, for example, because coughing in itself could create anxiety for colleagues. So tricky question.
Tricky question, and there's a couple of potential pieces there. One, I think, is around looking after yourself and that education piece, Rachel, and also knowing that a cough will create anxiety in others and not to judge them for that. Yeah, really, really important. One of the things that Sophie said when we were coming back in Ushuaia was saying, you're going to go home and you're going to be really excited to share 3 weeks in Antarctica with the people closest with you, and they won't care. They will tell you how the washing still got done, how they survived without you beautifully. They do actually care, but you've been away from the household for a month, and do not expect the reaction that you want. The people that will look at your photos may not be who you think will. That was really important information to remove blame and to be more compassionate, that while we've been swanning around Antarctica doing important work in the world, of course, people on the front line, at home, looking after the family, had a very different experience. And I think there's something that we can take from that. What do you think, Dave?
I think that's right, is that there is to be, people are going to be at different levels in terms of how they're responding to this. Some people that I've spoken to have been, essential workers, or some of my colleagues, their life has, been fairly unchanged in some ways. So they're at sort of a different stage of this process than other people. So I think that there's going to be a variety of how people are responding, and getting back to that point you had about sort of taking your own temperature a little bit as to where you're at in terms of your reintegration into the workplace as well. Having some time for some awareness of that too, because it's going to be different to where other people are at, and that's normal and okay.
So having some strategies, I think, could be helpful on how do I communicate with somebody who is more anxious than I am? How do I communicate with somebody that feels that their social liberties have been impacted because of restricted movements? So how do I communicate when I'm feeling judgmental? These are all really good questions, I think, to ask ourselves. Dave, have you got anything to add to where we could look for that? I'm thinking Kubler-Ross grief cycle could be a good place.
Yeah, that's the different stages of grief is probably a useful way of looking at that. I also that there's probably a stance of being curious and an appreciation that it's going to be different for different people and different to yourself. So I think that it's probably for people in the workplace and in families too, that checking in of, it's not just checking in, are you okay? It's more like, what's your experience been like and what they're making of it. So I think that sort of curious stance is going to be the most useful thing in trying to sort of understand where other people are at, and does provide an opportunity, hopefully, for to be able to provide support in the workplace, and maybe develop some of those relationships too.
I think I love that, because I think people need that deep curiosity opens up dialogue and takes you to unexpected places often. And I love that you're moving from "Are you okay?" to "What's your experience been?" Now we've come up to 12 o'clock, and all of the panelists and we've all allowed an hour and a half to be engaged in this conversation. We're here to stay and add immense support if you would like to stay. If you feel that you've got everything you need, then please jump off. But I think we've probably got another 10-15 minutes to answer some of the questions. Is everyone okay with maybe a 12-15 finish? Would that work with everyone's calendars? Just give me a thumbs up, thumbs down, or a wave bye-bye. Thumbs up. We're getting some thumbs ups from people I can see. Philip, I can see you there in the background. Philip's in Boston, and you're experiencing a very different experience than we're having here in Australia. So I'm going to take Dave's question, and what's your experience been like so far?
Yeah, so thanks for reaching out. I think you can see that it's dark here in Detroit. It's night. We're one of the heaviest hit states in the United States. We are entering right now the first stage of coming back online, with the first essential workers going back into office. I work for a big automotive supplier, so we have the first people coming back in, and we're trying now to figure out how to stage people back in, and trying to see also right around the globe to take some best practice in, touch base with my HR directors tomorrow and VP to see what can we integrate from the session that you guys been providing, and take some feedback back, some ideas. But I think one of the big points, as you really mentioned, is what Dave also brought up, is the anxiety of people with children being at home. most likely schools will be closed until September or end of the year. All public gatherings have been closed, will be shut down for another few weeks. So I think taking that anxiety and taking that concern of the people in is really important. And as Wadi mentioned, it has to be on a volunteer basis if it doesn't have to be in the office. So I'm taking a lot of good ideas back from you guys. It's interesting to see the different pushes of, let's say, government and industries of getting people fast back in, but then also how to manage with the environment, knowing the economy has to restart, but at the same time, keeping all the associates safe and healthy in times of crisis.
Yeah, thank you. And sending you love and thoughts for everyone in the US who, you're having a very, very difficult time over there right now. Philip, was there one question that you could ask one of our panelists, and no pressure, but if there was something there that you were going, this would really help me take this piece of information back to my colleagues, what would that question be?
That's a good question. I think there are many questions. I think one already got answered. I think there's a big trend in the industry over the last few years to go to an open floor concept, which is great for collaboration, but now also brings the challenges back, right? So we're, I always say, now it almost feels like hens in a farm all next to each other, which is great for communication. But now, how do you bring that anxiety level down, but still continue to collaborate other than just over Skype calls or something, and making it human again? So I'm trying to work with my colleagues to figure out how do we build teams again, how do we bring that collaboration and team spirit back, anywhere from meeting at the park, doing open air meetings with social distance, but just having the distance to each other and physically seeing each other while keeping an open floor or open space with fresh air and no containment in a closed space. I've been increasing my Zoom happy hours with the team, trying to bring some laughter and joy in with different ideas. So I think, and one of the takeaways from that Wadi also mentioned is to educate people about what the workspace is. So I think one of my things I want to take back is to maybe do kind of a vodcast or a very basic video to show associates what the workplace is going to look like when they come back, as you mentioned, with markings, with certain sanitization stations, almost like a video tutorial of what to expect, that people know what it's going to be when they're back in the office, to take some of that anxiety away. Again, I think a lot about it's about communication, education.
Well, that's a superb idea, actually, starting to prepare people so individually each organisation could actually create a short video. Here's what to expect. I think that's such a great idea. Ariana, I really like your comment here. I don't know if you're still on the call, Ariana, but it's important to use the term physical distance rather than social distancing. I think that language has such important impact. So I'm 100% with you on that one. Dave, the importance of languaging and how we speak to these challenges and connect into that optimism piece. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a good point around the social distancing. I think that because my experience, I don't know whether other people have had this experience as well, is that there has been an element of social distancing when you're out and about and amongst other people. There is a sort of a suspicion and that suddenly other people feel slightly dangerous in some way, and I think that that's really pervasive. I think that that's probably going to improve as we start to re-enter into some aspects of normalcy, but it's a consideration at the moment, and I think that language like that is really important. I think that the other thing is that it's very easy to fall into the cliches around this, and it's sort of become the term you said before, Wowdy, you said if you had $1 every time. It's the same sort of thing. You hear the same. People's email sign-offs are all the same. It can be quite frustrating, and I think that you sometimes lose the value of acknowledging some of those things. So I think that it's important not to sort of use platitudes, but sort of indicate to, like, signaling to other people around you that you are taking this seriously and you're thinking about it creatively rather than sort of rolling out the same platitudes. Yeah,
really good point. Wowdy, what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely agree. I think there's the language that we use is can either create the fear, or it could feed the fear, if you like, give it fuel, or it could actually get us to be conditioned to a point where there's light at the end of the tunnel. Using those types of positive or optimistic, it's probably the best way to put it, types of languages. And now is the best time to start doing that, because we've got this time whilst the government have said, officers, people can't return to the offices just yet, or at least those that aren't essential. But it's a great opportunity now to start feeding that language and start conditioning our people with that type of optimistic language. And I think that's something that all organisations should be thinking about and considering in regards to, building some optimism within the workplace. And I call it optimistic sentiment, because I think once you build that sentiment, it becomes much more easier for people to dip their toes in the water to come back to the workforce. And naturally there'll be those that will still be quite cautious. But again, it's taking that individual approach, listening to those people, focusing on what we can control and what we can't control, I think is really important.
I think so, absolutely, buddy. And Andrew Watkins has also said, consider the unwritten ground rules. Unwritten rules in a system is really important. We all belong to systems, and there are rules that are implicit, overt, assumed, and unwritten. So that connecting, which I think is a theme that everyone has spoken to, is connecting with people with deep curiosity for where they're at and their experiences, while we firmly, as Rachel would attest to, here are the rules that are really clear for our safety. And there's no compromise on these ones, but let's speak to some of those unwritten rules as well. So really good point there, Andrew. Rachel, you've been listening. I know you're scrolling through the chat box. I can see your responses. Thank you so much for doing that. Is there any themes that you're picking up from the chat box that you would like to add some more thoughts to before we wrap up in a moment?
Yeah, look, I was looking at the returning to the office comment. That was really good. I mean, from a psychological perspective, it's not minimising staff have been working at home. And so there is the fact that people have been working at home, I think, needs to be acknowledged. And when we go out, we do need to adapt our behaviour to minimise physical risk. This would not be the same if we had something like a vaccine, such as is the case in many workplaces that have flu vaccine, or all staff could be vaccinated, for example, if that was appropriate. But we don't have that. So really it's at least the next 6 months minimum. We need to just be careful. And there are ways that we can be in the workplace which are not... we will still be able to do work in the office. We will still be able to be in teams and collaborate and work with our colleagues. So it's a matter of just understanding what these things are to actually reduce the anxiety, but also, protect ourselves, because none of us have immunity to this virus. That's the bottom line from a scientific perspective, because if we did have immunity, it wouldn't be this same situation.
Rachel, thank you. Thank you so much for all of your expertise. We'll bring it to a close shortly. Wildy, the implications with everything that you've heard across the diverse lenses of virology, mental health, I know you've spent a lot of time thinking about the very aspects of return to work safely. What have you taken away from hearing the expertise of Dave and Rachel that will help make that a safer transition on every aspect for your people?
Yeah, look, I think that both Rachel and Dave have provided some brilliant insights. So thank you first of all for sharing that. I think for me, it's obviously understanding that certainly language is really important during this time. In terms of how we communicate. I think the aspects around the physical workplace, things like kitchens and where pathogens predominantly live and live everywhere, I guess, but because they're all around us. But those common areas that are the most vulnerable for our people are things that we have to treat very seriously. But equally, how do we offset that for people? So for me, just hearing those aspects gives me not only affirmation but also understand, I guess, we're dealing with a very complex virus that we are learning a lot more about as we go. It's not something that's just like a standard flu. Giving it treating it seriously is really important, and that's something that I've certainly taken away from both our guest speakers here today.
Thank you, and I know we've taken so much away from your expertise as well. One final question, Dave, from Raymond. I'm not sure if Raymond's still on the call. I can't see you, but we'll make sure you get this message back. It's a really important question. In New Zealand, Raymond says that we have 0 new cases in the last few days. So when we return to work, some people will be very dismissive and behave like normal, while other people are worried. Any advice, Dave?
That's a difficult situation, and I think it probably gets back to what you were talking before about some of those written and unwritten rules. That there's going to be some things that the workplaces need to do, and it's reasonable to expect of other people in terms of how they behave to sort of make sure that everyone's safe from their individual perspective, and for us as a society in terms of trying to reduce the spread of this virus. I think though that they're still going to have everyone is going to be affected in a different way, and it's still worth finding out what their experience has been and making sense of that. Sometimes it might be that that it's a conscious effort or an unconscious effort to try and get back to normal as quickly as possible, which is understandable, and I think that that's still a valid response and something that could be explored further.
Thank you so much. One of the things that I would, I'm sure it's a sort of stating the blinding flash of the obvious, is as we do come together in physical spaces, is maybe to avoid alcohol, because alcohol has us be less careful. So there are certain environments where it just may put Rachel, over to you.
It's very good to kill alcohol, so only the hand sanitizer.
Yeah, not forever. I know there's some social, norms around, Friday night drinks, but we behave differently, and with alcohol. So that might be another way of being safer. I want to say thank you to everybody who took the time to spend with us today. I want to share my deep gratitude to Dr. Rachel Cameron, Dr. Dave Carmody, and to Wouty Taché for sharing their immense expertise and knowledge. They've done this in service of our broader communities, their communities, our communities of people that they have not yet met. If you want to contact either of our panelists, you can do so via LinkedIn. I'll make sure everyone has their profiles. Rachel, Wouty and Dave, if you wanted to add anything about how people can contact you, you can pop that in the chat box, or you can actually just share that with people now.
Yeah, for me, LinkedIn's probably the best, and I look forward to and if you have any questions or thoughts, or you would like to have a conversation, I'm more than open to having that as well. So,
thank you, Rachel.
Just pop my email there, but I can also be contacted via LinkedIn as well.
Fantastic, thank you. And of course, Rachel's books on Amazon, and also her Health Equals Freedom website's a huge resource. Maybe you can pop your website in the chat box as well, Rachel. Dave, how do we contact you?
Yep. So my practice is Call to Mind, which is calltomind.com.au, and I've popped the email there if anyone does have any inquiries for me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. One of the things that a way of thanking our panelists today is to get on LinkedIn, hit the testimonial button, and write something about what you got from attending their session today. I know they're way too polite and humble to ask, so I will ask on their behalf. It helps them have more visibility in the work that they do. They do awesome work, and they've shared their generosity with us today of their own accord, donating their time to help us be safer as we return to work. So I want to close. I think we should have a photograph. I love a good Zoom picture. So if anyone feels comfortable to pop your cameras on, do, but by no means, if you're in witness protection, you can keep your cameras off. That's my second joke. I'm hilarious. I really am quite funny. Cess will help me take some photos. Look at your camera. Let's have a big smile. And so that we can actually get some photos of everybody today. That'd be really nice. you know how to contact me. I've been sending information to you over the past week or so, so I'm easy to get hold of. It's been an absolute delight and pleasure to spend time with you today. So please be well, have fun, dance like a loon rather than no one's watching. See you, bye.